Well, hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone listening in. Welcome to this newest edition of the VORW International Podcast. Pleased to be here at the microphone. I wish you all well. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Before we get into things, as always, let's clear our main orders of business first and foremost. If you are watching this program on YouTube right now, you may direct your attention to the video itself. I finally have fan art to feature in the program. I made the call in the last program, and so graciously you answered, and I appreciate every single one of you who took the time and effort to submit a piece of fan art for this program. Really means a lot to still get them after all these years, and it is certainly my absolute pleasure to feature your works in this program. Now, of course, let's give credit where credit is due. Tonight's program, considering the time, affords us the opportunity to feature 4 pieces of fan art. Our first piece of fan art, credit to Art by Cadence on Instagram. That's all one word, Art by Cadence, Cadence, on Instagram. Their work can also be found on TikTok at KNWVC on TikTok. The links to that are in the description of the program. Our second piece of fan art goes out to Spencer and Amy. Our third piece of fan art goes out to Alex, who I know has been a very long-time listener, I think for almost a decade at this point. Great to still have you around. And Alex adds, "It took me a while because I decided to sew it all by hand, as it's more relaxing. I used a combination of applique, reverse applique, and foundation paper piercing, all from my stash of scrap fabrics. I thought the one with fast food and vinyl records was quite fitting. Thank you, Alex." And finally, our final and fourth piece of fan art for this program is from a listener in Texas. Huge thank you to everyone out there who submitted your fan art. Truly my pleasure to have it featured in the program tonight. I know there were some more of you who also submitted fan art. Fear not, I have it all noted down, and you'll likely see it featured in the next program to come, which hopefully will be sooner than perhaps you think. If you are feeling artistically inclined and would like to create a piece of fan art yourself to be featured in an upcoming program, go right ahead, be my guest, have fun with it. That's what it's all about. All I ask is that you submit your creation to me via email. The email address is VORWINFO@gmail.com, and just let me know how you would like to be credited. It could be via name, it could be full name, first, last name, it could be location, it could be an online name, it could be a pseudonym, anything you want. Just let me know how you would like to be credited for your work, because I will do so in the description of the video. If you have a social media profile or a website where more of your work may be found, you could send me the link to that, and I will certainly include that as well. You took the time and effort to make the piece of fan art. Very least I could do is let folks know who made it, and, if you so choose, where more work like that can be found. So please let me know. If you don't, that's alright too. I always abide, though, by the better safe than sorry approach, and I will keep you anonymous by default in that case. And of course, if you wish to remain anonymous, just let me know too. Just say, hey, keep me anonymous. I will gladly oblige. One's privacy is a matter I always take quite seriously. Well, secondly, I welcome to this program 2 new sponsors. It actually came to me as a pleasant surprise, because it's their support that helps keep all of this going, and I don't believe I explicitly made the call, because I know oftentimes in programs I will, but I don't think I did in the last podcast. But two folks reached out to me. I was able to work something out with both of them. I'm very thankful things turned out the way that they did. So hey, give it a listen. Keep in mind, it's folks like this that keep all of this going, and if what they offer is appealing to you, please check it out. Remember Tamagotchi? The little digital pet you had to take care of? BuzzBuzz is like that, except your pet is a bee, and the way you feed it is by walking. Take more steps during the day, and your bee gets happier. Slack off, and it'll let you know. But here's the real fun. You join a hive with friends, family, or coworkers, and every step you take feeds the hive's honey together. You see who's walking and who's slacking, so you can cheer each other on. It's social, it's playful, and it actually works, because nobody wants to be the bee letting the hive down. Visit buzzbuzz.club to download the app for iPhone or Android. As a thank you for listening to VORW, use the voucher code STASH. That's STACHE, STASH, to unlock the special Unk Summer Bee for free. It's a laid-back bee with a curly mustache and a bright Hawaiian shirt, perfect for summer. The code is available through the end of August. buzzbuzz.club. Your next walk just got a little more fun. That's BUZZ.CLUB. If you run a business, you already know the feeling. You've got years of data sitting in your systems, tons of manual processes, and you're sure there's got to be a way to be more data-driven and efficient. But actually putting AI to work on it, that means tinkering with complicated software, hiring people you can't find, setting up new IT systems, and committing to some project that drags out an entire year. So you keep chugging along manually, rebuilding the same spreadsheet every Monday. Toolplex was built for exactly that. You don't need to become an AI company, you just need the results. Here's how it goes. You pick something worth fixing. Maybe you're tired of guessing how much to stock. Maybe you need to wrangle a complex ordering process. Or maybe you're just drowning in logistics as you scale. Toolplex builds you the solution, runs it securely, and hands you the keys. An easy-to-use app your whole team can run, no matter their technical experience. Real specialists who stay with you as things change. Toolplex uses the right tools for the job, whether that's an AI assistant, predictive models, or automation. Toolplex is trusted by grocery stores, manufacturers, and retail brands operating across thousands of stores. Our expert operators take the time to learn your business and then tailor a specific recommendation for you with no upfront commitment. Toolplex. Enterprise AI measured. To learn more, visit toolplex.ai. That's toolplex.ai, spelled TOOLPLEX.AI. If you would like to advertise on this program, I always am happy to do ad reads to certainly promote your goods, your services. If you have a website, even if you have music, social media, if you host another podcast or a radio show or anything for that matter, I'm always happy to consider it. Send me an email if you're interested, vorwinfo@gmail.com. Let me know that you're interested in perhaps having an ad read done. I do so at a very affordable rate. You just saw how it really works. The process is about as easy as it gets, so again, if it sounds appealing to you, just ask. Nothing wrong with shooting the question, and I'll send a little information packet your way, and thereafter it's for you to decide if you'd like to proceed or not, but as I said, there's nothing wrong in asking at the very least. And once you get the information, if it sounds good to you, we'll go from there, and like I said, you won't believe how easy it's going to be, and then your ad will be right in the next program. An opportunity if you're interested. And finally, and I always mention this, it's obligatory of me to do so, of course, keep in mind, in addition to this program, I also do my radio show. That's VORW, Radio International. I'm sure you've heard me promote it extensively. It's broadcast 3 times a week. Every week it goes out 1 hour at a time, so that's 3 additional hours of content each and every week. It is primarily broadcast on Shortwave radio for listeners in North America, South America, and across East Asia and the Pacific, though it also is, of course, streamed online and is archived on Patreon. In each program, I oftentimes discuss the news of the day. I try to do news analysis and filtration. I talk about a lot of things that maybe I prefer not to on YouTube, where I've gotten a good slap on the wrist for discussing what I thought were just topical issues. I could do so at least freely, so I'll oftentimes cover the war in Iran, I'll discuss Russia and Ukraine, I'll talk about a lot of world news and geopolitics, and in some instances, whatever else is on my mind. Sometimes I'll just sit around and casually discuss whatever happens to be going on, and other times it's formal news presentation and then analysis as well, because I do have a nose for news. And I also blend the program with listener music requests. I give some trivia about the music, I give some listener shoutouts, and have a mini mailbag of sorts. I try to have a light entertainment program that both informs and entertains, whilst keeping those two distinctly separate nevertheless. A lot of folks around the world tune in, like I said, multiple times a week, every week. I extend an open invitation for you to listen as well. Please check the description, or you could even look at the video right now. You'll see the times and frequencies, if you have a radio, that you can catch the broadcast on. I encourage you to listen in, and maybe even get a radio to listen in on. You could also, in the description, find the links to the live streams when it airs. However, this program does need your support. I don't get paid to do the program. As a matter of fact, I pay to do it. All of the airtime, everything, is not given to me. I'm not paid for. I have to buy the airtime and run the whole operation, and I do need your continuous help to do it. Thanks to your help, I've been able to keep this radio broadcast going for 11 years now, if you believe it. And let's keep a good thing going. You could support it at patreon.com/thereportoftheweek. That's patreon.com/thereportoftheweek, or you could donate via PayPal to vorwinfo@gmail.com. If you support the program on the Patreon, my way of giving back, it's really the least that I can do, but I hope it's a little something. You, of course, are able to access all of my radio broadcasts free of charge, and at this point in time, that's thousands of hours of additional content at your disposal, crisp audio, listen on demand. Totally up to you, but I hope you all understand why I pass the hat around. I like to get that out of the way at the beginning of the program, and now we could actually get into the show itself. So, as I mentioned, happy July. Crazy how time is, how time flies. It's surreal. Never ceases to get surreal, to me anyway. And I've gotten to a point now where I sort of I accept the passage of time, and I realize and understand I'm just here for the ride, however long that is, and I'm alright with that, you know? I think about that, and I'm okay with that, however long it ends up being. So, while the passage of time in some ways doesn't bug me as much, it still feels like it's just flying by. I mean, it feels like New Year was a week ago. Feels like 2021, that's 5 years ago now. It feels like that was maybe 2 months, 3 months ago. Maybe 2020 feels like it was 6 months ago. And maybe 2019 feels like it was a year ago. That's kind of the time scale that I'm operating under at this point. It's just how it all feels to me. But it's just crazy to me when I think we're in the month of July 2026, and next year will be 2027. I mean, it's just surreal to me. When you really think about it, like, I remember sitting there when it turned 2020. Obviously, I didn't know what a hellish year it would be, but I remember sitting there, and I was up in New York at the time. I remember sitting on the sofa and looking at the little clock on my laptop, and 1/1/2020, and the date, it looked so weird to me. And even though it didn't feel different, I mean, I didn't feel any different than I did 10 minutes before that point, there was a weird feeling about it, thinking, 2020? And now here we are, well over halfway through the decade, getting on 2027. Before you know it, sitting here, it'll say 2030, and craziness. Craziness, I tell you. And that's just how I process it. It just doesn't not feel weird, I guess, but I've come to accept it, and that's about as good as it's going to get, I suppose. It is the midst of a heat wave right now. I'm actually under a heat advisory as I'm at the microphone. Certainly quite a warm day today, I will say. I know a lot of the US has been dealing with heat, at least over the last few weeks. I even covered the heat dome over parts of the US in recent weeks. Heat advisory. So right now, it's the late afternoon, so it's the hottest time of the day. 98 degrees Fahrenheit is the actual temperature outside, but the heat index is at 110 degrees. And before I got to the microphone, I actually stepped outside, and it's to me, I would call it like a baking heat. I was able to stand out there for a bit, and I mean, I was fine, but I could certainly imagine if, this is not the type of day that you want to be out there doing a lot of heavy physical work. I will say that. I could probably sit out there and listen to the radio and be all right. I'm the type that doesn't really sweat much. Like, when I stepped out there, I mean, I was, I'm wearing what I'm wearing right now, dress shirt and tie, long sleeves, long pants, and then I had my house coat on, which, it's knee length, and was wearing that, all black. But, I mean, I didn't feel like I was dying of the heat or anything. Like I said, I could probably sit down and, listen to the radio for a bit, but if I were out there, trying to do some yard work or something, it's not the day for it. I mean, sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do, but if it can be avoided, one of those days I'd wager. And see, the thing is, the reason why it's getting this hot is just because a lot of the time here in Florida, this sort of heat is met with the sea breeze, and then you have the sea breeze collision, which causes the daily thunderstorms, and that provides some much-needed rain-cooled air. It breaks the heat and moderates the temperature a bit. However, there's some high pressure, largely over, especially the eastern portions of Florida. So these sea breeze collisions just aren't happening as frequently, which is allowing the heat to just build and build. And there are some isolated thunderstorms, and I'm not completely giving up hope that there won't be a thunderstorm today, but now we're getting around to, prime thunderstorm hour, as I'd call it, and while I see them popping up on the radar, they're just these tiny little thunderstorms, not the bigger ones that usually dominate, just these tiny... When you hear in a forecast isolated thunderstorms, this is like textbook isolated thunderstorms. It's probably an individual cumulonimbus cloud here and there, if I were to guess, and regrettably nothing close enough to have any impact, but sort of just popping up out of nowhere, so maybe one will pop up here and I'll get lucky. That would be nice. One can hope, and if not, well, I've made it through most of the day, and obviously I haven't burnt up, so I think I'll be able to make it through the rest of the day, regardless, but a thunderstorm sure would be nice. I'm just shooting the breeze right now, just some casual discussion before we get into the mailbag program, some random things I want to talk about. I'm thankful it's been a good week or so for the YouTube. Very happy to see that. I did this video the other week, and it was a gamble. I will admit that, because I was sick of these stupid releases, to tell you the truth. These stupid, overpriced, no hype whatsoever. Every time I saw one of these Hollywood meals, I thought to myself, this is a video that's going to be dead on arrival, and sure enough, proven right every single time. No one could care any less about these meals, and for good reason. You might say, wow, that sounds really, really negative of you. And I decided, I'm just going to make a video because there was some stupid meal that came out, and I haven't even checked. I've just taken a little bit of a break because this is just ridiculous. And there was some stupid meal that came out, and I decided I'm not doing this. And instead of sitting there and either doing nothing or just reviewing the meal that there's no interest for, I thought, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to talk about why I'm more or less fed up with these meals. And I'll ramble on for however long I did. It was about 20 minutes or so. And it'll be a shot in the dark, it's either going to sink or float, but nevertheless, I prefer it to doing this review instead. So, I gave my talk, and I hate that I had to resort to the title and thumbnail that I did, but if you want things to succeed these days, sometimes you have to give a little and play these little games, essentially. So I try to do so whilst maintaining as true to form as possible, anyway. I even criticized, because I knew what sort of title and thumbnail. I had the concept in my mind before I even turned the camera on, so I kind of knew the route I was going to go, and I even poked some fun at it in the video itself, but it did surprisingly well. I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. Like I said, it was a gamble, it was a dice roll, but it paid off in my favor. It got 650,000 views, and it's still surreal after all these years that many people are actually want to hear my thoughts on something, whether for whatever reason that they're tuning in. The fact that anyone's even giving it a view to begin with is still crazy to me. But either way, I'm glad that the video ended up performing as well as it did, because, dear listeners, you see, there was an event that happened the other day that would have required me to take at least, ideally, something of a break, whether I would have liked to or not. Because, and it's still a mystery to me how this completely happened, but I ended up scratching my left eye, and it was like, I still don't understand how I did that, because I get real weirded out with my eyes, admittedly. I'm just not the type. There was a time where I used to, rub my eyes and all of that stuff, and then there was an experience that happened back in 2014 where I did that, and I don't even want to talk about it. Something happened with one of my eyes that isn't supposed to happen, and ever since then I've just kind of been... I don't really touch my eyes, which is for the better anyway. It's more hygienic a thing to do, but it just kind of, having gone through that, there's just a mental connotation that's just, it makes me a little squirmy, I suppose. So I don't know how this left eye of mine got scratched, but all of a sudden, at first I thought that there was like an eyelash stuck in it, but it didn't get any better. And then it started feeling like there were like grains of sand stuck under my eyelid, but nothing I did helped in any way. Eye drops didn't work, trying to rinse the eye didn't work, nothing did. Hurt like hell, and when I looked in the mirror, the eye was all not bloodied or anything, but it was all red and everything, whereas my right eye was totally fine and totally normal. But my left eye looked awful, and it felt about as bad as it looked. And accompanying that was really just completely blurry vision. If I tried to focus on something through my left eye, it almost hurt to like even try to focus. Really, really bad light sensitivity in that eye. So I got it checked out, and it was a scratch. Nothing too crazy. Within a day, everything externally cleared up, and people aren't kidding when they say that the eye is one of, if not the fastest healing organ in the human body. Certainly not kidding, because a simple day later, if you were to look at my eyes, you wouldn't be able to tell that anything was wrong with my left eye, so that's good. And it's getting better by the day, but what still persists is that sort of blurriness and light sensitivity. That's still there. Because of that, setting up all the bright lights for the reviews and the videos and all of that, it's just, if I absolutely had to, I would do it, but it would make filming a video an extremely unpleasant experience. So I'm giving it a couple more days. Like I said, it's getting better by the day, and well on its way to fully recovering, but just letting it do its thing, and not agitating it any further definitely is helping. And then, before you know it, I'll get back to the camera, get some more reviews taken care of, get all that done, and that's going to work out well, I feel. As a matter of fact, because I haven't even checked, let's see what new releases there are, if any. Sometimes I should say, are slower than others. Alright, what does July bring us? Firehouse Subs welcomes new Smokin' Honey Melts. So, if you'd believe it, I've never actually had Firehouse Subs. Jack in the Box, serving its new Hot Ones menu. There isn't any. That's a West Coast chain, from my understanding, and I wish them well. I hope that their Hot Ones menu is less of a failure than the Popeyes Hot Ones menu was. That was abysmal. I certainly wish them well. IHOP launches Dubai chocolate pancakes. I know that's been pretty, not the pancake element, but the whole Dubai chocolate thing, has been pretty trendy the last year or two. They got that on pancakes now. It's interesting. Wow, Carnitas returns to Del Taco. It's the release of the year right there. But, you're just not really seeing anything, so I don't think I'm missing out on much. Let me check one more site for the fun of it. (7-11) releases. Okay, now these might actually have potential. Maybe I'll review this one next. Burger King has some new chicken sandwiches out. Loaded jalapeno original chicken sandwich, a club chicken sandwich, and what's this other one? The original. I'm gonna tell you what, the quality doesn't look really all that great. It looks like those spongy cafeteria grade chicken patties as opposed to a chicken fillet, which granted, this is Burger King we're talking about here, but when I see that, I don't really... I haven't had the best experiences with that, but it might make for an entertaining video one way or another, so we'll see. I might go for the loaded jalapeno one. Yeah, that might have some potential. Alright, well there's that. So, you got to see the process right there as I sort of looked and perused through what there is to potentially review. I'm kind of thinking out loud and seeing what I might end up trying out. And otherwise, not much else to discuss. It was pretty sad, the last 2 weeks or so for radio. There were 2 stations that went off the air. I mean, one I think would be more directly impactful to listeners than the other, but both are still sad. I would say the biggest loss to an actual, sizable audience was that BBC Radio 4 ended their Longwave broadcasts. They were... Granted, Longwave broadcasting is not a thing in North America, but over in Europe especially, they have the Longwave broadcast band, which spans from around 153 kilohertz to 279 kilohertz. And so it's just below the AM band, and Longwave broadcasting serves its purpose as being considerably well for regional level broadcasting, which, when you factor in the size of Europe, and most of the countries are akin to the size of US states, more or less, a single Longwave broadcast with sufficient power is oftentimes enough to serve as a national radio broadcast, and therefore you'd only need one transmitter, one frequency, and it would cover the entire country, day and night. And, then at night it might serve as even continental coverage and almost as an external service to the rest of Europe. So Longwave broadcasting was very popular for many, many decades, especially in Europe. Almost every country had one or more Longwave stations, and because there was only a certain number of frequencies, the Longwave broadcast band was very, very crowded. I even remember, because I discovered Longwave broadcasting back in 2013, when I was checking the WebSDR receiver that's located in the Netherlands, which is like an interactive, online shortwave radio, and it covers it also covers the AM band and the Longwave band in addition to the shortwave spectrum. And so I would scan around on it at random, and because it's based in the Netherlands, it's, you're picking up what this receiver in the Netherlands can hear at that location. And that's how I came to eventually notice the Longwave band as I was just, again, scanning around. And one of the first stations, of course, on the Longwave that I recognized even in 2013 was BBC, Hey, that's BBC, I recognized it, and that kind of gave me some familiarity. And I quickly began settling in, and if it wasn't shortwave broadcasts that I listened to, then it was the European longwave broadcasters that I would listen to. And even in 2014, 2013, there were so many of them to choose from. Every frequency had one or more stations on it. There were 3 different networks out of Germany. There was a French station. There was Radio Luxembourg, which was probably my favorite. There were 2 out of Iceland. There was a station out of Ireland. Countless longwave stations out of Russia, Belarus, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic. I mean, you pretty much name a country, and they had a longwave broadcast. And I remember this band was packed full of stations constantly. And I always enjoyed also, if it wasn't Radio Luxembourg on 234 kilohertz, I enjoyed listening to the BBC on 198 kilohertz. And particularly, some of you I'm sure are familiar with their famous shipping forecast. I actually would listen to that on the radio as it was broadcast live. Not that it had any applicability to me whatsoever, but then again, it doesn't really have much applicability to most who listen to it. I think many tune in for the same reason that I did. You found it interesting and comforting in a sense, and I always found it to be interesting and enjoyable. But over the last decade, the longwave broadcasts, it's been dying out way quicker than even shortwave broadcasting has. And, in 2013 or so, there were probably 40 or more stations still going in Europe. And now, there are 2 longwave stations still broadcasting that are in Europe. One is Polski Radio on 225 kilohertz. That is the only 24-hour European station left. That's it. From Poland. And the other is Romania on 153 kilohertz, but they're broadcasting on a reduced time span, so only during, I think, the daytime hours, and only at reduced power. So these are already signs that station is, hate to say it, but on death's door. And then there's only 2 other stations you could pick up. There's a station out of Morocco and a station out of Algeria, both of which, I know the Algerian one is in French, and I'm not sure if the Moroccan one, if that's a French service or if that's in Arabic. I'm not entirely sure, because the signal of that one is quite poor. But that's it, this longwave band has gone from just wall-to-wall, station after station after station, to mostly static, with barely anything there. And, it's so sad to see, and it's really been dying off. Every year 1 or 2 stations will go away, and it just adds up with time. And I had been, when my favorite station, Radio Luxembourg, went away in 2023, then I was trying to tune around and find a station that I enjoyed the most after that. And then I found RTE Radio 1, which was broadcasting on 252 kilohertz, and they had a program, especially for the overnights, that played some really good music, a lot of alternative. It's actually really good. And I enjoyed that, only to then get the news 6 months later that they're going off the air. So then I lose that station. So then later that year I decide, okay, RUV radio out of Iceland is still broadcasting on 189 kilohertz, and they also played some really good music too, similar to what RTE had. So okay, there's an alternative. And then what do I find out? Oh, next year they're going off the air too, and I lose them. And before you know it, all that's really left worth listening to is BBC on 198, and granted it's mostly talk radio, and I could hear most of that on the shortwave, so I'd just sporadically check in and mostly listen for the shipping forecast. But then the word came out that they were ending their longwave broadcast, and that was a pity. You know, I disagree with all of these closures, but the big bosses, they have their reasons, they have their agendas, they have what they want to push and press and so on, and I'm not the one sitting there in the boardroom making the decisions. But I listened to the last broadcast of Radio 4, at least on Longwave, and sad to hear them sign off. So at this point, there's really nothing left worth listening to, at least for me as a listener, on Longwave at this point. The last station that I would is gone, and that's about it. So it kind of closes a chapter for radio listening for me. You know, kind of a symbolic end, but a literal end at the same time, as, you know, I kind of watched that broadcast band die, and every station I liked go away one by one until there's now nothing left. So that was sad, and I know that even though I'm sure more people listen to Radio 4 on FM and digitally, etc., I guarantee the audience that tuned in on Longwave was not zero either, and I guarantee even in 2026 they still had actual listeners, even if it was a declining audience. I know there were people out there that were impacted negatively by the shutdown, and it's a move that I personally disagree with, partly out of course, self-interest, but as a broadcaster, I do have my money where my mouth is, and I do know that even in this day and age, from experience, you still have people out there that listen to traditional radio, that not everyone streams everything, and there's still folks out there, more than you would believe, if you'd believe it, that haven't the means to reliably stream or access content online. Or for those that do, radio still functions as a perfect fallback, if necessary. So that's a shame. There was also the loss of a shortwave station right around the same time. There are a few stations out there, still on shortwave, that broadcast, if you would believe it, the time of day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Atomic clocks, they are called. There are still a few that are still on the airwaves. I believe the most extensive is actually in the United States, a station called WWV, which is broadcast from Fort Collins, Colorado. They're actually, if you have a radio-controlled clock, and you notice, maybe once or twice a day, kind of resets and does its thing, the signal for that is actually transmitted from the same place. Fort Collins, Colorado, the exact same transmitting station and everything. But they also maintain a shortwave service on numerous frequencies, 2.5, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 megahertz. And it just broadcasts the time of day, little ticks at each second, and then at the top of each minute, an announcement as to the time in UTC, and then a little beep marking the minute. They also have a corresponding station on the same frequencies in Hawaii, WWVH, which is for listeners, of course, in Hawaii and the Pacific. And that's the most extensive time service that still is available on shortwave. If you're in North America or in the Pacific, you could easily catch it. There's also a time station in Russia, RWM, shortwave. They function a little differently, where it's mostly with beeps and Morse code and pulses, but they still broadcast the time of day. And there have actually been some occasions where I was able to hear their broadcasts, and I even wrote to them a couple years back and was able to get a card from them, which was nice. There's a time station in Italy on one frequency. There's a time station in South Korea, and one in China, I believe, BPM. I also was able to hear them once, and got a card from them as well. BPM, they take a similar format to the US stations, WWV and WWVH, which I'd wager they probably took inspiration from. So there's a lot of these time stations still around on shortwave, but up until last month, Canada also had a time service, CHU. It was operated by the Institute for National Measurement Standards of the National Research Council, and its signal was used for continuous dissemination of official Canadian government time signals derived from atomic clocks. The station had operated for over a century, started broadcasting in 1923, and its final broadcast was on June 22nd, 2026. They broadcast on the frequencies of 3330 kHz, 7850 kHz, and 14670 kHz. And this is where things get a bit controversial with how I feel about it. WWV and WWVH in the US were always the more heavily utilized time services as far as these shortwave broadcasts are concerned. I even remember there were a few years back, there was an effort to examine the budget of the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which is what operates WWV and the corresponding stations, and initially was thinking about getting rid of them, and the pushback was enormous. And what mattered most wasn't even the politics of it all, but I remember as I was looking at this, because as both a shortwave listener and broadcaster, even if these aren't broadcast stations in the traditional sense, insofar as providing news, information, or entertainment goes, I would still sometimes wonder, who listens to these time stations exactly? And when WWV and its network were threatened with shutdown, people came out of the woodwork with actual real-world use cases for them. You had people that used them to calibrate equipment, especially on ships. They're even still actively used in some ways by the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, the Department of Defense. There were documented cases of it being utilized, many instances actually, for scientific purposes, in various laboratories, for even work with astronomy. Of course, you also had instances of people just using it to get the time of day. What I'm trying to get at, though, is when this station in the US was threatened with shutdown, what was demonstrated clearly, immediately, and overwhelmingly? That people still use this station and still use this service for the intended purpose. Right? They use this service for the time of day, for various reasons, but that is why they mainly use it for. As intended. We will be losing an important service if this station is gotten rid of. And the argument was convincing, and there's a reason why these stations are still on the air to this very day. And why, mark my words, they are not going to get the axe anytime soon. Yes, there's pessimism, but believe me when I say it, they are not going to be touched. If they could be, they already would have been. So then, that leads me to CHU out of Canada. Now, I emphasized this right off the bat. I like CHU. I've listened to them, I've wrote to them numerous times, and I enjoy having various options available for the purpose of timekeeping, even if it may be a little redundant. It's still nice to have alternatives. However, one thing that I had wondered, and I'm just sort of saying the part that people have probably thought, but not a lot of people directly expressed, because this is a station that was beloved by many, so, it's going to hit a nerve with some, but I'm going to share my thoughts and opinion anyway. I remember thinking, even before this shutdown was even announced, this was years ago, I remember thinking, seeing how many people still utilized the US shortwave services, WWV and WWVH, since those stations cover not just the US, but they cover all of Canada, and they actually do so more extensively than Canada's own time station, CHU. Does CHU have its own independent audience of people that depend on their broadcast just as much as people used WWV? I remember thinking as well, maybe was there overlap, were there some listeners that only listen to CHU, and some that only listen to WWV, and then there's some that alternate between both, depending on the signal. And then there was the third possibility. I thought, what if, because of this redundancy, all the people that actually use these stations use WWV and WWVH for timekeeping, and, well, what if CHU doesn't actually have much of an actual serious audience to it at all? But I had no way of verifying that. I remember checking, and I remember periodically thinking over the years, because I knew from seeing just the response and all the comments and stuff on various YouTube videos and forums, and even just the news it generated a couple years back, about the potential shutdown. I was able to get a glimpse of the audience that WWV had and still has. And then I remember listening to the Canadian station. I remember even thinking, I wonder who listens to this, I wonder if they have just as many people that use this service, or what. I had no idea, and I couldn't find much. So then it was announced about a month ago that Canada was shutting down their time station, CHU, on all frequencies on June 22nd, which would then leave WWV, WWVH as the sole shortwave time station in North America. So this left me interested. It also left me a bit despondent at the same time, because this was another station, that I would check on. I wasn't a hardcore listener to this, mind you, but it was just a signal that was always there, And sometimes there is a certain comfort to that as well, just knowing that this broadcast is always going 24/7 and you could rely on it. And, yeah, it's just one signal of many, but that doesn't make it worthless either. So immediately, while I was dismayed by the initial news, there was also a sense of curiosity that arose in me from my recollections of when they tried to shut down the US stations and the response that garnered. Now that this Canadian station serves the same purpose, is going to be shut down, is there going to be that same outcry? And it finally dawned on me, I will finally be able to get as clear a picture as I could possibly get as to who is going to be impacted by this service going away, and it's going to answer that question that periodically entered my mind as to the audience of this station and if there's that overlap or what sort of usefulness it has. And I came to a definitive conclusion, and a conclusion that, it's not the easiest to admit. From everything I could tell, CHU Canada is a station that was beloved by many, utilized by few. Because I checked hundreds of comments on every YouTube video I could find about this shutdown, any discussions on forums I could find about it, and you know what the two biggest themes I could find were? Unlike the US situation, which were people actually being impacted, the first and biggest loss I could find overwhelmingly was, I'm a ham radio operator, and I'm going to miss using this signal to check the propagation for this frequency range. That was the first group of comments, and I would say what encompassed about 60 to 70% of them. So these people aren't listening for the time of day. They're listening just to see if the signal is propagating or not, so they know how reception conditions are. And is that a convincing argument to keep this station that is broadcasting for the purpose of time of day for official, scientific, and public use? Is that a compelling argument to keep their service going by saying, hey, we're hobbyists that use your signal not for the purpose of timekeeping whatsoever, but just to check and see if it's propagating and if I can hear it or not, and that's it? I will tell you right now that is not a convincing argument, and it will fall on deaf ears. I know that's not what people want to hear in some cases, but I say as a broadcaster, for instance, with my own programs, since I broadcast on the same medium extensively, if I announced, say, that, I'm just speaking hypothetically, I hope it would never ever come to this, but let's just say, for instance, that my shortwave broadcasts on 4840 kilohertz, which I broadcast, as I mentioned earlier, for the purpose of informing and entertaining a general audience worldwide. If those, say, were getting very little in the way of response, and maybe the finances were getting tight, and I started having to contemplate making the decision to shut those down, so maybe I put out an inquiry saying I may have to shut down this broadcast, and if things don't change, it'll go off the air in a month, and I see what sort of response comes in. And instead of hearing from listeners telling me, no, please, don't keep the broadcast, don't get rid of it, keep it going. Maybe I don't write in much, but I listen regularly, and I really enjoy your commentary, and I listen for the news, or I listen to hear your thoughts on the tropical weather situation, or for the music, or whatever. Instead, it's not comments from listeners that tune in for the content, but instead I just hear from person after person after person saying, if your signal goes away, then how will I know what the reception conditions are like on the 60-meter broadcast band? And I would be like, what? So, all of you are just listening for the fact that there's a signal on air, but you couldn't care less about the content. That's not encouraging at all. It might be helpful to some in certain niche manners, so to speak, but it is not the intended purpose. That applies, in that case, for CHU as well. There were no comments that I could find whatsoever from any scientific institutions, I couldn't find any sailors, anyone in government, anyone on any ships anywhere, no one that used it to calibrate professional equipment that isn't a ham radio. I couldn't even find one single person that said they used the station to get the time of day. Every single comment was either, I use it to check propagation. The second biggest was nostalgia, saying, I remember first hearing CHU back in the 1960s, which I get it, it hurts. It absolutely does. How do you think... Keep in mind what I was just talking about with the Longwave broadcast band. There's an element of nostalgia to that, and that was only going back to 2013, so I get it. If you go back 50, 60 plus years, of course it's gonna be bitter. And I understand that. I'm not even going to argue against that. I get it. But that is still not a use case. And then the third group of comments, most interestingly, were from people saying either, I didn't even know that this station existed because I only listened to WWV when I needed the time, or it was a group saying, I'm not really going to miss it because we have WWV anyway. And I am not exaggerating. I could not find any contemporary comments whatsoever demonstrating that the station still served a purpose in 2026. I found zero, and I wish I was exaggerating when I said zero, but I'm not. It was literally zero. Out of every comment, there is not one single comment from anyone that actually used the station for its serious, intended purpose, whereas again, with WWV, it was effortless. You found use case comments everywhere you looked. They were there, and there was nothing. There were no petitions. This disclosure didn't even make even the local news or anything. And while I don't want to make the mistake of assuming that just because I can't see any visible response suggesting that the station has listeners for its intended purpose means, therefore, that there are no listeners for its intended purpose. Maybe there are some people out there on the high seas or whatever that can't write in or don't, that still used CHU over WWV for timekeeping. Maybe there were some folks in really remote parts of Canada that still used it here or there. Maybe there were some scientific institutions that still preferred CHU over WWV, but preferred not to voice publicly their concerns. Maybe they are out there. Either way, the number seems to be quite low. And as much as I hate to say it, if for one reason or another the Canadian government budgetarily felt as though they were between a rock and a hard place, I could understand why they made the decision to axe this station. Because taking an objective look at it as a broadcaster, doing my own audience research for a station that isn't even mine, I understand why they came to the conclusion that they did. At the same time, and this maybe is where the irony comes from, as much as I see the reason why they made the decision that they did, on a personal level, I still oppose the shutdown of CHU. And I feel that in an entire government budget, the amount of money required to run a station such as CHU, which, mind you, these aren't massive transmitters that we're talking about. Even though it's 24/7 broadcast, these aren't 100 kilowatt transmitters or anything like that. 2 of the transmitters were 3 kilowatts, and 1 was 5 kilowatts. The electric bill isn't going to be that much, even if it's a 24/7 broadcast, especially when you're running on a government budget. So I think that it's preposterous if they couldn't scrounge up the money this year to keep it going. And I think having that redundancy, even if it seems not to be applicable to many, is still a good thing. And I think having it available either as a fallback or even for a minority of listeners that maybe aren't overly visible is still worthwhile, again, considering this isn't the type of endeavor that would break the bank. So, if they were forced to the wall and the decision had to be made, I understand why they made it. But as for the decision itself and the principle of it, I disagree with it. So that was it. That's all that I really wanted to talk about. You're listening to VORW International. Now for the remainder of the program, I'm going to be opening up the email, and we are going to have ourselves a mailbag show. The mailbag show is as simple as the name implies. I open up the email and I read your listener feedback. If you have any questions, comments, as I mentioned, pieces of feedback, any questions that you have of me, both regarding the YouTube channel, the radio broadcasts, or anything in general, they could be totally random questions. Things you've been wondering, you're welcome to ask them. This is the place for it, Q&A. But also, if you're just curious as to my thoughts on this, that, or the other thing, you're welcome to ask for those as well. It could also be used, though, as a platform for you to share thoughts of your own, whatever they may be, whether it's something that you read or watched recently, if it's just a random thought that occurred to you one day that you want to share with the world, whatever it may be, it's your platform to do that as well. Totally random, free-form, a clean slate, and you'll see real quick as we delve into the inbox exactly what I mean. So if you're thinking, well, it sounds interesting, but I don't really know what I would say or do, maybe just listen in to the program that is about to follow. You'll see how it goes, and maybe that'll provide some inspiration. The way to write in is very simple, and just keep in mind, this program only exists thanks to the folks that do write in. If no one writes in, there is no mailbag show. So it is you, the listeners, that make this program what it is. So please consider that, and I encourage you, I openly invite you to write in, and the way to do it is very simple. Just send an email to VORWINFO@gmail.com. That's VORWINFO@gmail.com. Understand that there may be some emails that I may miss, and if it's deemed inappropriate, it may be omitted, but I try to get to whatever I can, and I certainly try to discuss a great variety and diversity of topics, questions, and thoughts, as well as viewpoints. I try to get to whatever I am able to. If you do feel like your email has been missed, though, do not hesitate to resubmit it. It is no nuisance, no bother to me. With that said now, let's open up the inbox and see what awaits us for this program. Our first email comes from Toby, who writes, "Just got done listening to the podcast. First of all, thanks for the newest episode. And second of all, don't let these weird people mess with you. Just a bunch of sad people with nothing better to do with their lives who think it's funny." Interjecting, I thank you for your kind words and support. You continue, "If you were to ever do gas station reviews, Casey's is technically like a top 5 pizza chain in the United States. I'm partial because I'm an Iowan, founded here, grew up on it, but I think it's pretty good. I think they're expanding all the time to new states, and recently they were added to the S&P 500, so I'm sure you'll get some closer to you in the future, though Barstool didn't give it a great score. You seem to have been in good spirits in the latest episode, which I was glad to hear." A final question, and interjecting, I will impart some thoughts on this, and we'll see how this plays out. I am not against giving broad predictions. I will admit I haven't been following this as closely as I did in, say, 2022. This is a question regarding the midterms, or 2018. However, I think as the election draws closer, and once all the primaries are over with, then I'll especially start looking with finer detail. But you ask, do you have any thoughts on the upcoming midterms? I have a hard time seeing it going well for the Republicans with gas prices where they are, along with the Iran conflict. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I understand if not given YouTube and censorship. You have a good night. Well, thank you, Toby, for your questions, your kind words, and your understanding as well. It really does mean a lot. Suggestion as well for the reviews. So, broadly speaking, because, politics these days is what it is, but I gave predictions for 2020, for 2024 even, the elections, the 2022 midterms. I will admit, for 2020 and 2024, the presidential elections, my own personal predictions were actually pretty darn close. In that, 2020, I thought the election was going to be a lot closer for Trump than people expected it to be. And indeed, the 2020 election was decided merely by, I think it was 40,000 votes. And that was it. If there were 10,000 more Republican votes in Arizona, 10,000 more in Georgia, and 20,000 more in Wisconsin, Trump would have won in 2020. Now, people, of course, can voice their criticisms of the Electoral College, this, that, or the other thing, but those are simply the facts. It was a closer election than a lot of people think. When you just look at the map and the popular vote, you think, oh, this looked like it's a blowout. You realize it's actually decided by less than 50,000 people, split between 3 states with substantial populations. That actually is a pretty close election. And I expected in 2020, despite what the polls suggested, I fully expected Florida to continue as a red state, which it did, of course. And I will add, as far as political analysis goes, Florida, the days of Florida being a swing state are dead and over, and Georgia is more to the left of Florida at this point. I would submit that Florida is even to the right of Texas as of 2026, and trending further in that direction. I was on a tangent. My 2024 prediction, I got every state correct. The one that I was most uncertain about was Michigan, and I thought, normally, if the Rust Belt doesn't really split, if one state goes one way, they'll usually all follow, but Michigan was the one state which I recall Kamala Harris polling the best in, and what surprised me the most, I had Trump winning the entire Rust Belt in my predictions, but the one, again, that I was most uncertain about was Michigan. I thought Michigan was going to be really close. As it turned out, Wisconsin was actually the closest state in the Rust Belt, and Trump won Michigan actually by a pretty comfortable margin. Wisconsin was the one that actually came almost down to the wire, and was the state that was most likely, or closest, I should say, to have going for Kamala Harris, which is very interesting. I thought that the margin would have been heavier. I thought it would have been opposite, essentially. So that was personally surprising to me. In 2022, my predictions for the midterms were a bit off. I thought that it was going to be more of a wave year than it actually was. So now that leads me to 2026. I do think that the midterms in general are going to favor the Democrats, especially in the House of Representatives. However, I don't see it being a massive sweep, shall you say, that if you look back to the 2018 midterm elections that you saw back there, where I think there was a change of maybe, 40 or 50 seats. You're not going to see that in 2026, in my opinion. It wouldn't surprise me if a number of seats do change hands, but if a surprising number change from both Republican and flip to the Democrats, but there are also Democrat seats that flip Republican as well. I do believe you're going to see a bit of both, and I think you are going to see some outcomes where the incumbent is going to hang on one way or another, and the results may prove a tad surprising for some. It would not surprise me, though, this is actually what I more or less predict, if 2026 ends up being a reverse 2022. I expect the House of Representatives to flip, indeed, from Republican control to Democrat control, but I think when all of the flips and all of that are, at the end of the day, I think it's only going to be by a few seats, maybe 5 to 10 seat advantage at most. That's my prediction. I don't think it's going to be some super majority or anything like that. I think they might have the House by, like I said, maybe 5 to 10 seats, and it's going to be thin. That's what I am predicting. I think a lot of the gains in some states and some parts of the country are going to be canceled out by others. And I think the Senate is going to be a lot harder for anything definitive to flip. I mean, it might get a bit tighter, but I do believe that the Senate is going to remain under Republican control. Either way, I think, regardless of one's personal satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the political situation as it stands, I think for most of the electorate, what I've learned, especially with midterm elections, a lot of things come down purely to the economic situation. So we will see. We will see what happens. If the price of gas lowers considerably, regardless of circumstances, the Republicans might even hold steady. Whereas if the economic situation deteriorates, then maybe the Democrats are going to gain a couple extra seats, in the House, and maybe flip an extra Senate race. But I do think that for either party, there's sort of a hard limit, so to speak, as to what's actually going to be possible in an election such as this. Interesting question, and we'll see. I might be completely wrong. We'll find out in November, won't we? Our next message comes from Bryce. Short check-in, says, "Hello, Review Bra, long-time listener here. Just wanted to check in and thank you for your long-time reviews and podcast. While current events continue to unfold in our everyday lives, you also continue to bring comfort." From Bryce H. Thank you, Bryce. Really appreciate your kind words there. This message reads, "Hi there, John. Report of the Week. Review Bra. My husband and I have become very regular viewers and listeners in the last couple of years, both to Report of the Week and VORW, but this is my first time writing in. I love hearing about how much you enjoy the geckos and lizards that come hang out on your door and around your lights in Florida. I happen to be a hobby/small business gecko breeder. See Rainy Day Geckos on Instagram, YouTube, etc., specifically focused on New Caledonian gecko species. We have a Rhacodactylus Leachianus, I butchered that name so bad, or lychee, who is special needs named Tempest, who has to get medicine orally every night by hand. Lychees, as they're known, are the largest gecko species in the world, so getting them to take medicine every night is a challenge. But she's become particularly fond of you and your videos. I know it sounds stupid because you would think a lizard wouldn't be able to comprehend a screen, but something about the single, steady shot, your calm face and voice makes her settle down to take her medicine. Granted, she sometimes does not like shots of the food item coming close to the camera, but usually is okay with it. I took a whole long video of this as proof. Sadly, my phone's motherboard melted, so the raw, unedited version is unacceptable right now, but I have a link to an edited version on my Instagram. Hope you enjoy it. Let's see, and you have a second part, and let's just check out this video. Thank you for including it, by the way. Wow, that is a decent-sized gecko right there. Very pretty, if I may add. I've always been fond of the, of all the... Oh, that's great. Yeah, watching intensely, just locked in on the screen, just as you said. Isn't that something? Thank you for the video. Now, to your question, you said, or you're right, I should say, you've said in the past you wouldn't consider pets like cats or dogs due to health issues, but have you considered a gecko as a companion? They're absolutely phenomenal pets, extremely easy to care for, and you could actually set it up with an automatic mister if you don't want to hand mist. They don't even need extra light or heat as long as they don't overheat. That'd be about 88 degrees or over, and are kept somewhere with available cooling, since it's Florida. They're surprisingly hardy for squishy little guys. If you ever do have questions at all about geckos, New Caledonian or otherwise, please feel free to reach out anytime. And, of course, if you ever actually would like a New Caledonian gecko, I'd give you a good discount. I have other questions I could ask here, but I figure I'd save that for another email and keep this one on theme. I enjoy your content so much, and Tempest does too. Take care and all the best from Sarah, Rainy Day Geckos. Sarah, thank you for listening in and watching. Sarah and company, and Tempest too. And a good question that you ask. It's something that, I've granted, I do have a very fond appreciation for all of the lizards and geckos that I see here in Florida. I like them very much. I enjoy just watching them do their thing. Every day, really, I will actually get up and I will take a look out at the little, the screened-in enclosure out back. That's where I'll film the videos outside. And, there's a screen door, but there's a space underneath that screen door that can actually allow lizards and geckos to enter in to this screened-in area from, the greater, broader outside world. And I've actually become acquainted with some of the regulars, you can say. During the daytime, you have the various anole lizards, and then at night you have some of the geckos that come in as well. But especially during the daytime, when I'm able to see them best, there's at least 4 different, actually 5 now, anole lizards that have made that screened-in area their home. And it used to be 4, but then there's this tiny little baby one that I saw just the other day. It's so tiny, it's well under an inch long, but may that little baby lizard grow up to become a magnificent creature one day. I'm sure it will. And then, the house geckos. They're always out. I always turn the light on, and they always gather around it and feast during the night. And there are occasions, where I will see a lizard that ends up inside the house by accident, and I have a methodology, I'll hunt them down. And when I say that, not to harm them in any way, but, I specifically have a methodology where I'm able to kind of approach them in such a way that it doesn't necessarily frighten them, and I get a decent-sized cup over them, then slide a little piece of cardboard or paper underneath it and get them back outside, because the last thing I want is for them to either get stuck on something or let alone starve and have to find the poor thing's remains. And I'm always very good with that. If ever I see a lizard inside, I kind of drop everything and tend to it and make sure the lizard is brought back outside where it can flourish in its environment. But have I ever thought of getting any as a pet? I have not. I still have a lot of my own problems and issues to deal with first that, kind of comes... That's my main priority right now, but all of the local fauna, I wouldn't call them pets, but it's the closest thing to pets, I think, that, I could say that I've had that I could, in one way or another, put my name to. I see these lizards, and I kind of look out for them in a way. I want them around. I like having them around. I appreciate them, and I try to foster the environment, outside a little bit for places that they could hide out in or perch in or little nooks and all of that. And I just try to give them a pleasant environment out there, take things into account. I do some research and all of that, but I like having them around, and I hope they like being around, granted. Thank you for your question. If you have any more, don't hesitate to send them over. Andrew writes, big fan of yours for a long time. I've even got a couple of merch shirts that I wear proudly. I've always wondered if, when you say running on empty, if it's a nod or reference to the Jackson Browne song of the same title. Keep up the great work, from Andrew. Andrew, thank you kindly. No, it actually is not, if you would believe it, and I imagine many would find that hard to believe, but keep in mind, when I came up with the Running on Empty series, I was only, I guess I was maybe 14 years old at the time, because now we're going back 15 years. So I was only 14 at the time when I started the Running on Empty series, and as much as I would like to pretend that as a 14-year-old back then I was well-versed in the great music of Jackson Browne, I was not. I'm just giving you the honest answer, I would have no clue who Jackson Browne even was. When I came up with that name, Running on Empty, it was purely in regards to the expression, that, you're running on empty, insofar as being really hungry. And that was... Because also keep in mind, when I first started the Running on Empty series, there's actually a second tagline that went along with it. So normally, it was supposed to be as intended. I would say, hello everyone, this is Running on Empty Food Review. Then I would sit down, or steady myself, and then I would say, boy, am I hungry. It's time to refuel. So there was no reference at all to the Jackson Browne song. It was just more or less in regards just to the broad expression. I heard the Running on Empty song probably about maybe a year or two later. I instantly liked it, not because for any sort of narcissistic reason. I thought, it's based on Running on Empty. I thought, this is a great sounding piece of music. And, of course, many, many other fantastic selections by Jackson Browne. No, I mean, granted, there was never any intention of trying to copy Jackson Browne or any of that. Like I said, I was just a 14-year-old. I'd never even heard of him. And, like I said, I wish I could be one of those, and say, oh, yeah, I was 10 years old and knew all of the classics, and I was an old soul and everything, and, this, that, and the other thing, and I'll admit what's what. Good question, though. I'm sure many others have wondered that as well. Thank you for asking. Sorry if I get your name wrong. Marin, I believe it is. Marin and Kara from Portland are writing. Hello, Review Bra. I hope you're having an enjoyable spring. My wife and I recently found your content through your food reviews on YouTube and have been thoroughly enjoying watching these and listening to your podcast. Even purchased a shortwave radio in hopes that I might be able to catch the programs here. Only thing holding me back from catching your broadcast is not being able to stay awake, mostly due to the time difference. I will send you an updated broadcast schedule, by the way. There are some rebroadcasts that should reach the West Coast at perhaps a more appropriate hour, so I'm going to send that your way. And if you do get the signal, let me know. Now you continue. I wanted to send you this message because I have a couple questions and maybe a suggestion for you. I'll preface it by saying I am also a long-time radio enjoyer, though I got into this from the FM side, thanks to my favorite radio station, KMHD. So, my first question is, do you ever listen to FM broadcasts as well? And if you do, and here is a suggestion, have you ever heard of the website called radio.garden? It is a site that allows you to listen to FM stations from around the world and places them on an easy-to-use and intuitive map, which is fun to explore. A friend of mine showed it to me about a year ago, and it has quickly become one of my favorite sites. So, interjecting first, seldom. I seldom listen to FM. I'm not really... There's too many commercials a lot of the time for my liking, so I don't really listen much to FM radio. But if I do, there's only a tiny handful of FM stations that I'll usually listen to. Here in Central Florida, on rare occasion on the weekends, I'll sometimes listen to 104.1. I believe it's WTKS FM. They play on the weekends, a lot of alternative rock from the 90s, which is nice. Just constant music. But, you still have the ad breaks in it, which is always frustrating. Sometimes on the weekdays I'll listen to 105.9 Sunny FM. They play, it's adult contemporary. And sometimes 107.7, I forget their call sign, but that's also adult contemporary. And that's literally it. And the only times I ever listen to any of those stations is usually if I find myself doing some sort of activity that is during the daytime, and I'm indoors, and if anything on the shortwave isn't coming through, and I just want some music on in the background, just, some incidental music to, just have going, I'll usually just tune to one of those stations, but I don't actively really listen to FM radio much. If anything, I usually prefer AM or shortwave for general and serious listening. So, FM, on rare occasion, I don't neglect it, but rarely do I listen to FM. Usually if there's something else I could listen to, it'll usually be something else. Radio.garden, I have heard of them. I actually heard of them a good long time ago, and I'll check them out on occasion. I think it's a really cool site. Whoever came up with that site, brilliant on their part to aggregate all of those streams, and then the aspect of having them all on that map, like that perfect visualization, easy to use, and I do agree, a lot of fun as well. Continuing back to your email, my second question may be a bit of a digression, but I wonder what you do while you listen to radio. For me, one of my favorite parts of listening is that it allows me to fidget with one thing or another. For instance, I like to listen while playing video games like OSRS, that's old school RuneScape, or even reading. Do you also do these or similar things while listening? I remember you saying that you used to go on night walks while listening to the radio, but you don't do that anymore, so what do you do? That's another good question. Pretty much a little bit of everything, when I have the radio on. Well, I'll give an example. The other night, I was tuning around. I had the radio on probably from, I would say maybe 4 p.m. until 10 or 11 p.m. or so. And, during that time, I was mostly at the computer, and, I just changed the stations as the different broadcasts came and went. And, I was just surfing the internet. I was doing some reading, responding to some reception reports and emails, I was checking the news, and all of that, just usual computer stuff. And the broadcasts that I had on, it was all shortwave in my case, so I started things off, I think, with Radio Romania International. They have an English broadcast that comes in, during the late afternoon hours, so I was listening to them. Then I switched over to, I got a fair signal for at least a little bit of the Voice of Korea from the DPRK, and I listened to some of their English service. Then I switched it over to Ifriqiya FM, which despite the name is actually a shortwave broadcast from Algeria, and they were coming through nicely, and they had some African music, and I listened to them for about an hour. Then I switched it over to the Voice of Turkey, it was, and listened to their English service from 6 to 7. Then from 7 to 8, there was some music programming, eclectic, just on one of the U.S. brokered stations, I think WBCQ. Then from, I think, 8 to 9, I think I listened to the BBC World Service. Then from 9 to 10, listened to KBS World Radio, their English service, that's from South Korea. And, I just scan around and I see what catches my interest. And I think from 10 to 11, listened to some talk program on, I think it was WRMI. And, so I just scan around, and I do that on a daily basis. I mostly just listen to shortwave. I find the softer analog quality much more pleasant on the ears, If I ever do anything, if I sometimes play pool or whatnot online, usually have the radio on in the background. If I do any puzzles online, I'll have the radio going. If I play RuneScape, I'll have the radio going. And of course, if I'm going to watch, some sort of video, or for instance, later that night, I watched some video about the Oort cloud, so I didn't have the radio going while I was watching that. But in other cases, I got up and I went to check on something with the HVAC unit. I was running into some problems with that about a month ago, and thankfully I was able to fix it and got everything sorted out. But, I just periodically check on it, of course, because this is the time of year where it's working hard. And, so as I went over to check on it, I brought my radio with me because it would take a few minutes, and I just set it up, on a nearby counter and adjusted the antenna, and I had that going in the background, and, just had that going. So, no, I just go about my business and my day and, listen to the radio. Sometimes it's through the speakers, sometimes it's through the headphones, and like I said, though, it's a matter of personal preference. For me, the softer sound, the analog sound, is much more easier on the ears for me. So it's, I like it. I like the format of the shortwave broadcasters better. It's just a bit more old school, and I find it preferable. So that's what I mostly listen to. Sometimes I'll listen to AM radio as well, but mostly it's the shortwave. And good question. Thank you for checking in. Aaron writes, "Hi, John. I enjoyed your latest podcast, and I've been an active listener for quite a few years, and I still get a lot from listening. Aaron, I already recognize you. Good to have you back." You add, "Your response to the reader regarding the question of time going by quicker and quicker, life passing by, definitely resonated. Since 2020 in particular, my life has seemingly been on an extra fast setting. It can be worrying, and there are times that, and this isn't unique, I'm sure to me, that one can't help but look back and worry about potentially not living right or not living to the fullest, and I think this is only natural. Hope you are well. Best wishes from Aaron." Aaron, thank you for your thoughts. I think that's very well said, and I do agree. I think it's one of those things, that we all deal with, I think, one way or another. I would imagine it's almost part of the human condition in a sense, and you want to say that it gets better, but I don't know if I want to tell you that it does, but I would be lying if I think I said that it actually would. That's why I kind of accept begrudgingly that I'm just here for the ride, because what else can I do about it? I can't change the way that this is. I can't suddenly make it seem like it goes by slower. And I've just come to learn that the more I try to do that, the worse it gets. So if I just try to let it go and essentially just say, this is just the way that it is, this is just the way that it's going to be, and I'm here for the ride, it doesn't change the fact that I'll suddenly look back in 2014, which still feels so recent to me, is now 12 years ago. Doesn't change that fact. It doesn't change the fact that that's startling, to put it mildly, but I guess it makes me feel a little bit better about it when I just try to take it day by day, and I've just come to accept that I can't do a thing about it. I'm powerless to change the hands of time, and that's all that there is to it. Heck, what I also tell myself, I am not guaranteed a single day on this earth, a single additional day, I should say. And for me anyway, the way my life has been, I sure as hell am not owed a single more day on this earth. I could tell you that. And I'm content with that, whether I'm here for weeks, months, years, decades, however long that is, that's however long it's going to be. I try to make the most of my days, and even if they're small ways that people I'm sure would find stupid or make fun of, and would think, oh, you're not out there, you're not actually living. I think that's subjective, I think it depends on the individual. I think it depends on what one derives enjoyment from in life, and what one considers to be fulfilling in existence. For some, yes, maybe it does take grandiose experiences, and for others, it may be the small things that could achieve the very, very same feeling. For me, it's a lot of the time the small things that matter more than anything else. And that's all that I can really say. But thank you, Aaron. It's nice to hear from you again. I know you've been here for years, and it's always it's heartwarming in a sense to have some folks that have been with this program for all this time. Thanks for sticking with it. I really do appreciate that. Hello, John. Review Bra. My name is Cole, a college student in Minnesota. I hope this message reaches you well. I wanted to write in and explain how much I'm enjoying your Patreon. Well, thank you. Interjecting just to begin with, thank you, Cole. It really does mean a lot that you support it on the Patreon. All these broadcasts, everything that you listen to, wouldn't be possible if it weren't for your support. And I mean it. You play a direct role in keeping all of this going. I mean that in the most literal sense, so thank you. Thank you, Cole. Getting back to your question now, because you did include one, you said, I recently became a subscriber after watching your YouTube intermittently the past couple years, and the broadcasts you upload are very entertaining. I really enjoy how you give your perspective or coverage on news at the start, before getting into the songs. Well, thank you. That's a format that I really got into the groove into over the last couple years. I really got into that format especially probably around 2019 or so. There was always a format where I always usually started off with the talk and then got into the music, but I got it really down to a science of sorts starting in 2019 and then 2020 when COVID happened, because then I really focused on delivering the news about the pandemic. And then once that quieted down, I switched to just more general news, especially world news, which I try to focus on, and then get into the music. So I'm really glad you like that format. It really does seem to resonate well with a lot of listeners all over the world. You continue, throughout my listening, I was curious about the purpose of an EQSL card. I looked it up online and I was able to gather that it serves essentially as like a virtual business card, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. If you could explain the purpose of this, then it would be greatly appreciated. And you also included a music request. Let me star that email because I hadn't, so I'm going to note that down right now so I don't lose track of it. And you also said, on a more sincere note, thank you for everything you do. You started out as a YouTuber whose food reviews made me chuckle. Your humor is perfect, by the way, never change it. And eventually grew into one of my favorite channels. Throughout my life, your content has been a constant, so thank you sincerely for continuing to upload. Myself and thousands of others appreciate it every day. Thank you again for all your hard work from Cole. Well, Cole, thank you for your support and for your kind words, and I hope you know how much that means to me. It really means the world, and thank you so much for both sticking with the reviews and then supporting it on the Patreon and enjoying and appreciating the radio shows too. It means a lot to me. Sure, as you could tell, I enjoy getting behind the microphone and doing those shortwave broadcasts so much, and it always warms my heart to hear from a listener, be that online or on the radio, that appreciates that work. So thank you, Cole. And it's a good question, and one that I could certainly answer as to what on earth an EQSL card is. So the purpose of a QSL, and I'm going to give an abridged version of this because I kid you not, I could seriously talk about this for an hour straight, and I'm going to try not to, but this is still probably going to last about 20 minutes because I could talk about this all day. I enjoy talking about it. Number one, a QSL, the reason why they call it that, it's a tradition essentially that goes all the way back to the old days of Morse code. Back in the 1920s, especially 1910s, 1920s, when radio was in its infancy, voice communications over the radio, especially in a two-way sense, were still, it was technically feasible, but they were far from perfect. So one of the ways which radio operators back about 100 years ago managed to communicate was through, of course, Morse code. And, just through the dits and dashes and all of that. But one thing, as you can imagine, with Morse code, I'm sure even if one isn't overly familiar with it, one can conjure a mental image. You'll have the guy there with the little visor and the vest with the bow tie or whatever, and they'll have that little device that they call the key that they'll be tapping, and it'll go dit-dit-dit, 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 and it'll do that. Well, what quickly became understood is that, it usually takes a few dits and dashes to type a single letter. So operators quickly realized that, especially in regards to quick two-way exchanges, it would be a whole lot easier and faster if we could devise various three-letter codes, essentially, to mean certain things. That way, we could all get the point of what we're trying to say a whole lot faster. Essentially, then, Morse code developed a very early form of pretty much text abbreviation. Remember in the days, in the 2000s especially, when, before smartphones and autocorrect and all of that, people had those BlackBerry phones and everything, and you had the text language and the abbreviations, and everything was just so chopped up and abbreviated, but it was because people weren't necessarily overly familiar, and it took time, to type these things up, so it was easier to just make shorter cuts here and there to send a text message. Well, the exact same thing pretty much existed 100 years ago with Morse code, and it was eventually almost internationally agreed to that such a thing called Q code was established, and there were various terms that are actually still used to this day, both in the worlds of amateur radio as well as international broadcasting. Now, it more or less exists as a tradition at this point, but remember, back in the 1910s and 1920s especially, it existed more out of necessity. So you had all sorts of abbreviations. You had QRH, QSL, QRP, QRM, and so on and so forth. And all of these little abbreviations mean whole different things. So QSL is one of those abbreviations. And essentially, what QSL originally stood for, back in the 1920s and 1910s, was, "Do you confirm receipt of my transmission?" So with QSL, back in the 1920s and 1910s, was essentially used in the following context. It could be sent with a question mark, which would mean, "Do you confirm receipt of my transmission?" aka, "Can you hear me?" Whereas QSL without a question mark means, "I confirm receipt of your transmission." Essentially, back in the days of Morse code and all of that, it's essentially a means of saying, "Can you hear me? Is anyone out there listening?" "Oh yes, I'm out there listening, I can hear you." And it's just a three-letter way of acknowledging that, which was very useful, of course, back in the days of Morse code. Now, how that correlates to broadcasting, it became a phenomenon, especially in the world of shortwave, that even persists to this day, though it lingers now today more as a hobby than it does out of any sort of essential practice. But when it comes to broadcasting, especially in its infancy, especially back now in the 1920s and 1930s, when radio broadcasting was now getting a bit more revolutionized, the quality was getting better, transmitter powers were increasing, and most importantly, more people were getting radios. In the world of shortwave especially, mind you, back then, radio was it. And there was no way, number one, of knowing that anyone out there was listening in, but number two, at that time, for the technical staff, especially at these shortwave broadcasters, there was no way to remotely monitor broadcasts and be able to tell how their signal sounds in the target area. So, in those days, and this even went all the way as far as its absolutely essential purpose, this went all the way into the 1990s even, that let's say you have a shortwave broadcast. I'll even use my own broadcast, for instance. I have an airing of my program that's transmitted from Okeechobee, Florida, WRMI, broadcast with 100 kilowatts, and it is beamed toward Europe on 15770 kilohertz. Nowadays, there are all sorts of tools that exist that I could use right here on my laptop that I can check online shortwave receivers and see how the signal sounds in the target area, and I could figure that out on my own. But before any of that existed, how would I have any way of knowing that this broadcast is, number one, reaching the area that it's supposed to be reaching, and number two, that it sounds the way that it's supposed to sound, that it doesn't have any distortion or interference, etc., and that is through the process of what they call the reception report. And I think the name of that is self-explanatory. It's a report that a listener writes and sends that lets the broadcaster know how the signal is coming through, wherever they happen to be located in. Now, going back in time, reception reports were utterly essential to many, many radio stations, because that was the only way that the technical staff had of knowing that their broadcasts were, number one, effectual, number two, reaching the target area, number three, were of good quality and were not suffering from any interference. So for the engineers of these broadcasters, and they could have been small stations, big stations, didn't matter. The process of listeners in the target area, or anywhere else for that matter, sending in reception reports, are extremely, extremely useful. Now, while some listeners, of course, sent in reception reports to these stations just out of the goodness of their heart, of course it still took time and effort to compose. Especially in the days before email, you'd either have to handwrite the reception report, pay for postage, get it sent out into the mail, or typewrite it. And to do all of that for no response whatsoever. I mean, if you're a huge fan of whatever station you would listen to, that might be one thing, knowing that you're helping out their engineering team, but it became very obvious that if there was some sort of incentive provided to listeners for putting forth the effort to compose a reception report, it would make the whole effort a lot more worthwhile. So as a result, as essentially a token to say thank you for taking the time to let us know how the reception is on your end, stations would send in return to listeners a QSL card, which, as you mentioned, is kind of like a business card. I always look at it more like a postcard of sorts. And before the internet, and even well into the internet era, most QSL cards are actually not EQSLs, but they were actually physical paper QSL cards that were sent in the mail. And, they're really no different than postcards. On one side, it would have any sort of graphic, that would oftentimes pertain either to the station, it might have a picture of their transmitter or antenna, might have a picture of the station staff, or if it was an international service, it might have a photograph of, some national landmark sites, etc., or it might have some scenic photographs. It might be a little bit of everything. And then on the back of the QSL, there would usually be a filled-out response saying, "Dear so-and-so, we hereby verify your reception of our broadcast," and they'll give, the frequency and the time and the details, sometimes the transmitter site and some technical information. And oftentimes, these broadcasters, big or small, would frequently update their QSL cards, also to serve as incentive for listeners to continue submitting reception reports. So they could send in another one next month, and they would get another one with a new design on it. And that quickly became a hobby in and of itself. You would have people that would collect QSL cards. Not that there was any monetary value in it, but it's just something that would give people something to look forward to in the mail. I myself, as a matter of fact, collected QSL cards, physical QSL cards, that is, and I did so all the way back from probably 2014, even to present. I don't really send out reception reports requesting QSLs much anymore, though I've actually recently started getting back into it, but it is something that I've done. Now, of course, I like the paper QSLs the best. I think, having something physical there, going to the mailbox and actually getting the, there's just an old school feel to it, there's nothing good in the mail these days anymore anyway, so it actually gives me a reason to look forward to going to the mailbox, and I don't know, there's still something about it, you still even get some that send the old striped airmail envelopes and everything, and it's, it's a lot of fun, but granted, the amount of stations that actually send physical paper QSL cards is dwindling rapidly. 10 years ago, there were so many more that did, and it decreases by the year. So, there's fewer and fewer. They're still out there, but it's getting rare these days. But stations still do appreciate reception reports, and the phenomenon of an EQSL card has become more prominent, and it's exactly the same thing. It's just the digital version of a QSL card. It's usually sent either as, usually just an image file as an email attachment, but it's the exact same thing. It usually has some sort of picture that is affiliated with the station or country of origin in one way or another. It verifies the details of the reception report sent as correct, and it's, a little memento and a token and, something for the listener to remember the station by, and, kind of gives them incentive also to keep tuning in. So, QSL cards, though, they've went from being essential to the technical departments of many stations, now more or less to being that of a hobby. However, and now I say this as, of course, a shortwave broadcaster myself, authentic listener response is still far, far more valuable than just checking the reception myself on remote shortwave receivers, because even though if I could check these online shortwave radios, let's say over in Europe, that maybe the signal is making it over there, hearing from actual real listeners on real radios is far more valuable, because that tells me two things that me checking just remotely can't. Number one, it tells me that people are actually listening, and number two, it tells me people in the real world are able to actually hear the broadcast, not just what this computer program essentially is telling me, but what someone with a real radio, maybe even just a portable set and not some highly technical SDR receiver, but someone with a real actual radio that most people actually use is able to hear it. I'm hearing from an actual person, and that is 1,000,000 times more valuable than just checking the signal. Now, one thing that I should emphasize, though, is that in the world of shortwave listening and broadcasting, now, I could only speak for myself, but the vast majority of feedback that I get, because keep in mind, shortwave is a medium, even in this day and age, that still has an active audience worldwide, at least in the tens of millions. most of those listeners have no idea what a QSL is. And I am perfectly fine with that. Most people still listen to shortwave for the content. You know, people are going to tune in, let's say, to the BBC for world news and perspective, not to send them a reception report. And if people are going to reach out to the BBC, it's usually going to be if they have a comment on the program that they heard, or want to reach out to one of the hosts, or whatever that might be. They're not going to be sending them a reception report. The same can be said for, let's say, the U.S. government stations, which, contrary to some belief, the Voice of America is actually still broadcasting, as is Radio Farda to Iran, Radio Marti, Radio Free Asia. All of these entities are still broadcasting. I'll use Radio Farda, for instance, since Iran is still in the news. They broadcast 24/7 on shortwave to Iran. You're probably going to have people writing to them with maybe news tips or thoughts on the programming, not going to be sending them reception reports. Some people might let them know. They might say, hey, I hear you good on 5860 kilohertz, but your other frequency is being jammed by the Iranian government again, so I listen to you on this one. But the people that are saying that are just saying so in the casual sense. They're just letting them know how they can hear them best. They don't even know what a QSL card is. They're not requesting one, and they're not going to get one. And as far as my own broadcast is concerned, when I ask, as you hear, of course, in the programs, the ones that you hear on Patreon are the same ones that go out on the shortwave. I ask, I say, hey, let me know that you're out there listening in, and I always get all sorts of emails, but 99.9% of the emails that I get are listeners saying, hi, I'm listening in, sounds good. Saying, hey, just want to let you know that I'm tuned in. Oh, I'm listening in from Singapore. Oh, I'm catching you loud and clear in Tennessee. Oh, hey, this is so-and-so. Could you please play the song? And that's really it. Or people might say, oh, great show tonight. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of static here. But people aren't asking for QSL cards. However, if someone sends a reception report that's organized, formal, and specifically requests a QSL card, I will verify it with an EQSL card of my own. Now, I will admit, I hope a day comes, I don't know if it ever will, I've been saying this for years, but ideally, if I ever get around to it, I would like to send out old school postcard QSLs in the mail, and they would actually be hopefully high quality, printed. I would fill them out, on the back by hand. I would even give a signature on them, that's like very old school. That's what they used to do back in the, 50 years ago. You would have someone from the station that would sign it to formally, make it official. And I would take it back to those days. But as it stands, I still do EQSL cards. But, I have all sorts of designs out there. A lot of the time, I feature various fan art, but sometimes I'll feature some of the transmitter sites that my broadcasts are sent from. And, so if someone actually specifically requests a QSL, I will send them one, provided, of course, the reception report they sent is correct. I mean, there have been times people will ask for a QSL, and they claim they heard my broadcast on a frequency that I'm not even on, at a time that I'm not even on, and it's just totally incorrect. And I'll just let them know politely. I'll say, I don't really think that you heard my show, but here's a broadcast schedule, and if you want to try again, I'll be happy to verify it. I've gotten that a couple times, but QSL requests, especially from North America, are something that have been seriously in decline these days, and it's a declining practice. It's almost dying completely. So that's the reason why you might have noticed I recently started mentioning EQSLs in the broadcast, especially to North America again, just to let listeners know, hey, if anyone out there still even knows what one is or would like one, I still offer them, because it had gotten to the point where even though I would get thousands and thousands of emails a month from North America, there would be times where I'd get 0 QSL requests. And I kind of got a little nostalgic, I guess, because when I first started out my broadcast back in 2015, even in North America, QSL requests, it was like a whole culture that existed still, and it was very formal. It was very formal, almost ritualized in a sense, and it's really died out. Granted, I think, morbid it may sound, I think a lot of the people that wrote to me back in 2015 and sent those formal QSL requests were probably on the older side and have probably passed away, and there's really not many people around anymore that still do it. As an example, and of course I'm not going to name names here, but just to give a couple examples, for instance, everything's going to be anonymous, but just so you could see the difference in North American QSL reports that I still get. And granted, I maybe send out, to listeners in the US, now that I've mentioned them again, I send out maybe 5 to 10 EQSL cards a week. Like I said, 99.9% of the emails that I get make no mention of QSLs. But the ones that I do get, here's one. I'll give you 3 examples of QSL requests I get from North America in 2026, and then I'll take you back to maybe 2015 or so, and you'll see the difference. So this one says, I'm in Ocean County, New Jersey. Your signal is 5x5. That means really good. You're playing Tom Petty on 15.770. Can you send an EQSL? Thank you. And I verified the reception report. I sent the listener an EQSL card, a broadcast schedule. But you see, it was very short. It was almost like a check-in, and said, could you send an EQSL? Another reception report came in. This one was actually even shorter. It just said, heard transmission on 15.770 megahertz, 2025 UTC, S9 reception in the state of Ohio, USA, please QSL. And then he gave his name. And S9, that's a good signal as well in radio terms. Again, a very short email. You could see they're very short, straight, and to the point. And this one wasn't much different. I'm listening right now. I'm in Lakeland, Florida. Signal is phenomenal. If possible, I'd like to request a schedule and a EQSL card, and then gave some information. So you could see these are very short check-ins, but ever since making mention of EQSL cards on the air, I actually started getting emails again on a regular basis from listeners at least requesting them, which I like, because I've got 30 designs of them just sitting there collecting dust, and it's I want to do something with these. Then, if we just, for the fun of it, take a look back in time, if we go back to oldest emails, compare it to some of the emails that I got back in 2015, 11 years ago. Dear Sir, I'm reporting reception of your VORW Radio International broadcast in North Little Rock, Arkansas. Date, Friday, January 23rd, 2015. Time, 4 to 5 UTC. Frequency, 5110 kHz. SINPO, 21222. Fair signal with strong interference. This is a form letter. And this listener went on to describe in a whole paragraph the program contents, actually 2 paragraphs, the reception setup, and said, I hope you find my reception report to be correct. Please verify with a QSL card. Sincerely yours. and then the full name, address, everything. This is like a full form letter. And this was another one. This one was even longer, and it's all very formally addressed. Dear Sir, it is with great pleasure that I report the reception of the Voice of the Report of the Week show via WBCQ. I heard your station in February 2015, and goes on the frequency of 7490 kilohertz amplitude modulation. There was a whole chart here explaining the reception. They gave timestamps of the individual songs that they heard. This is an extremely detailed reception report. This harkens back more to the days when these were appreciated by technical departments. So you see the difference, where back then I got these full-scale, formally written letters that really ceased to exist in North America these days. And nowadays, well, at least I'm glad that the practice is still alive, and things just change, you can't bring that back, what's gone is gone, but I'm glad at least that there's still folks around, even if it's become way shorter and more casual, that there are still folks that at least know what QSLs are, and while I suppose the formality of the practice has disappeared in North America, I'm glad to at least still fill some out for listeners that ask for them. I'm certainly not going to give anyone a hassle if it's not a formally written full-scale letter anymore or anything like that. If I get any like that, it'd be fun, but if someone just sends in a short check-in and wants a QSL, I'll send them one too. I don't discriminate like that. I accept that it's been 11 years and things have changed, but I noticed that those sorts of very formal letter reception reports, and a lot of them would be even longer than that, and the listener would write a bit about themselves and how they got into radio, and they would talk about their age and their occupation and write a little bit about where they're from. And I always thought it was, a very nice illustration of the whole global aspect of the medium. I got a lot of letters like that from probably maybe 2015 until maybe around 2019, 2020. And then in North America, they just really dropped off. They just got fewer and fewer and fewer, and to the point where if I still get one like that, it just sticks out immediately because they are so incredibly rare. Now, the irony of it all is that if I am to send a reception report myself, and if I write to a station and request a QSL card, if you would believe it, I've realized I'm probably one of the last people in North America that still sends reports in that style, because it's the same thing that I do. For instance, I recently sent a report to Radio Romania International, and I just enjoy writing it like this. It's like old school letter writing, and, why not? But just to give some excerpts, I said, Dear Radio Romania International, and this is what I wrote. I said, I had the distinct pleasure of receiving your English service on 15420 kilohertz at 20:30 UTC Sunday, the 31st of May 2026. I listened until 2056 UTC. Reception was very good at my location in Central Florida in the United States. I listened with a Texan PL880 receiver and a telescopic antenna. Reception was again quite good with robust audio and mild fading. Every word was discernible and the broadcast was heard with total ease. SINPO 45544. And then I took it even further. I said program synopsis. The daily 30-minute English service programming consisted of a well-balanced mixture of news, music, as well as cultural, historical, and touristic features. And then I went even further than that, and I had 8 organized in a line, time-stamped summaries of what I heard at various moments. So I said, 20:30 UTC program introduction, frequencies and means to hear the broadcast, 2035 UTC, news bulletin, discussion of recent Russian drone incursion, 2039 UTC, Romanian language lessons. Then after I went through all that, I included comments, where I wrote 5 paragraphs about really what I appreciate in their broadcasts, because also I haven't written to them in a while, so I wanted to let them know, hey, I'm still out there, and I still appreciate what you guys do, and this is what I like about your shows, and I'm very thankful that you still target North America, and I just wanted to let them know that. And then, kind of going back to the more formal manner, I concluded always by saying, if this reception report is found to be correct, a token to remember your station by would be sincerely appreciated. Therefore, I humbly ask if you would like to send a QSL card or postcard in response to this reception report. It may be sent to the following address, and then I give my information. That's how I write reception reports still, but I don't expect anyone else to actually go through the time that it takes to send something like that anymore. I do it purely by choice these days. But even a decade ago, emails like that weren't even considered unusual. They were just the standard. Amusingly, in North America now, emails like the one that I sent are a rarity. They didn't used to be, but again, most of the folks that would send them, in that manner have died off within the last decade. But in some parts of the world, such as East Asia, emails like the one that I had just read, that I send, are actually still the standard. And in areas such as Japan, China, the Philippines, I get countless messages written exactly like that every single week for my East Asia broadcast. They're that formal, but they also still include personalized comments. But, you could even look at them. They, so many of them all start the same way. Dear sirs, I have very great pleasure in receiving your station as follows. That's one, that came in last Thursday. This is another one that came in a few minutes later. Dear sirs, it is with pleasure that I hereby inform reception of your broadcast. A few minutes later, to VORW Radio International, I am pleased to report reception of your broadcast as follows. And then what you always see, if the details of this reception report are in accordance with your station log, I would appreciate sincerely to receive your EQSL card. So it's just amusing how that sort of very formal letter writing style has almost completely died, and it's just a cultural change. Like I said, I've no problem with just short check-ins. It's perfectly fine. I don't want people to change how they write just because of how I do. That's the last thing I want. But it's just a change I've noticed in the 11 years I've been doing this broadcast, that emails like the ones that I still get from East Asia and the ones that I send myself were the norm and the standard. And then, they, in North America, trickled down and then almost stopped completely, and I still kind of just carry the flame just because this is just my thing, and this is how I do it. Whereas in East Asia, that is still alive and well, and I suspect anyway that it's probably going to be the last part of the world, if you want to look at reception reports and the tone and formality of shortwave correspondence. This is probably going to be the last area of the world where such formal, long-form, detailed and neatly organized letters are going to be so commonplace. I think it's just more or less ingrained in the culture there. But what I always appreciate, and what I do with my own reception reports, if I am to send any, despite it being so formally organized, I always include a section for personal comments, which then I share my own thoughts, more plainly, and it doesn't come across, necessarily in any sort of cold manner, so to speak. And then listeners that I have in East Asia do the exact same thing. They have it all very formally written and organized, but they also have a comments section, and that's when then they'll say, oh, I really liked that you played this or that, or oh, I'd never heard that song before, and they'll include their own thoughts, whatever they may be. Well, I talked way more for 20 minutes, but I think you all kind of knew what you were in for, so thanks for bearing with me. Let's get on to other things. Eric checks in, who writes, Hello, John. Hope you are well. I've only written in once or twice before, but after your most recent YouTube upload, I wanted to get your thoughts on something that has been gaining more publicity in recent years. Several podcasters and streamers, including Joe Rogan, have discussed the idea that what people report as aliens, UFOs, and cryptids, which would include Bigfoot, are also fallen angels, i.e. the same demons described in the Bible. There is a book titled Piercing the Cosmic Veil by a gentleman named Joe Jordan, who is a director, or was a director, of MUFON in Florida. For those in your audience who may not know, that stands for Mutual UFO Network. That is the non-profit volunteer organization most widely known for investigating UFO sightings. Half of Joe's book is a compilation of stories sent to him by people who claim to have stopped alien abduction experiences in the name and authority of Jesus Christ. I don't know anything about your personal spiritual beliefs, but I would be interested to know if you've ever come across this idea before and what your thoughts are on it. And Eric, I also thank you kindly for your addendum, which you added. I really do appreciate your kind words there. So an interesting question, Eric, and I have certainly heard that before. I believe it's the Nephilim, right? That's what a lot of people will posit, that, especially I hear that with various Sasquatch experiences, but I even have, as you mentioned, seen certain UFO accounts and reports that also have more of a biblical connotation. And I find the concept to be quite interesting, although I personally can't say I necessarily find myself in that camp. I mean, granted, if something were to come out and prove me wrong definitively, I'll of course accept the situation for what it is, but I've just never been compelled by any sort of biblical Bigfoot or UFO connection. I have always been of the more, perhaps, boring mindset that if, let us say, any sorts of Sasquatch-esque creatures exist, they are solely flesh and blood animals which have not any supernatural or spiritual ability, and they simply are primates. And as for UFOs, I'm of the opinion that while UFOs exist, I have yet to be convinced, at least in any time in modern recorded history, that is, that the Earth has ever even been visited by any sort of extraterrestrial life. That's not to say that extraterrestrial life doesn't exist. I certainly think that it does, simply by the numbers and the statistics. However, I don't necessarily believe that the universe is teeming with life either. I was even thinking the other day about so many of the exoplanets we discover, and you could look for yourself. What star systems are most of them around? Red dwarfs. And not to kill the mood or anything, but red dwarf systems those do not bode well for prospects of life. So many of the planets there they don't even have an atmosphere. They're stripped away because of all of the radiation, the solar flares, etc. So many of these little rocky worlds that you hear about that are in the habitable zone of this, that, and the other thing, they end up being practically right next to a red dwarf star, and then when you finally get further analysis by the James Webb Telescope, for instance, turns out there isn't even an atmosphere to any of these planets, or they're tidally locked, and it just goes on, and there's so many disqualifying factors, at the very least, for life that you would see on Earth to be sustainable on any of these exoplanets that seem so promising initially. It falls through every single time. I don't think we have enough information whether or not to say that the rare earth hypothesis, for instance, is where things actually stand, but do I lean heavily in that direction? Most definitely. And maybe life, maybe microbial life, maybe that is commonplace, but intelligent life, civilizations, etc., I'm just of the personal opinion, and this is just based on gut feeling, I admit, is exceedingly rare. I think it could be out there, but there's so little of it. I think the odds of any independent civilizations actually even coming in contact with one another, I should say, to me anyway, seems so absurdly low. It's practically no different than if we're alone out there, for all intents and purposes. So I don't think aliens have even ever visited Earth. I think most of the UFOs people see, it's either misidentification, like the drone hysteria a few years ago, or they are secretive craft, most definitely, but they are of human origin. But you never know. These are things I doubt we'll really ever have the full answers to. It's fun to ponder either way, and my stance on all of this is ever evolving. Hunter sends in a short email. Hunter from Utah. Listener for years, first-time writer. And I appreciate that. You sent in a picture. You said, I recently found a unique plate at a thrift store and decided to paint you with a rather green mountain in the background. I know it's not amazing, but it's the best of my artistic abilities. I really appreciate that, Hunter. I like it. Thanks for sending that picture. You add, I also recently purchased a radio, and I'm looking forward to picking up your broadcast. I'm not sure if there's a specific theme for your next podcast, but I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on changing life plans and goals. I have recently made some significant life-altering decisions that I hope will bring me happiness and bring me closer to the future I want to live. Thank you for the consistent entertainment. Huge fan of the podcast, YouTube channel, and hopefully the Shortwave broadcasts. Your content always encourages me to think more deeply about life and focus more than just this current moment. I frequently revisit your video and Still I Evolve, which is now already 7 years old, and the message is still very meaningful and helps me remember that I can always grow. So thank you, Hunter. It's a good question. It's a pleasure to hear from you, Hunter, and I really appreciate your kind words and your message of support, and I think that's an interesting question that you raise, and I think the broad point of it all is very much true. Life is always changing, and this is speaking, in generalizations, but life always is changing. There are always changes. There are changes that we can anticipate. There are times where we literally are the change, that if there's a certain future you want, there are those opportunities that you could actually take initiative and, to the best of your ability anyway, will that future into existence through your action alone. There are times where if you want to get yourself on a certain path, no one's going to do it for you except for yourself. And sometimes it really is as straightforward as, if I want to do this with my life, well, I just gotta get up and do it, and get myself on that track. And then there are other instances, of course, where things just happen by pure chance, by pure coincidence, and in those cases, those unexpected cases especially, I've always found that those developments are either the best things that happen to us or the worst things that happen to us, with very little in between. And those come out of the blue, and there's really no way to anticipate those, there's no way to prepare for those, there's no way to see it coming. There are going to be things, and this applies to every one of us, myself included. I'm kind of dealing with this right now, actually, that there are things that are going to happen in life that are either going to change things unimaginably for the better, or just destroy you, at least inside. And there's no way to process that, especially in the negative context. There's no way to sit there and have the foresight to know, okay, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to get this news tomorrow, and alright, I could prepare for it and be ready for this, and so on. There's none of that. Instead, I'm going to find myself up each night asking myself, why did it have to be this way? Because nothing prepares you for it. So, you have the bad. There's also the good, though. There's beautiful things that can happen that'll make you sometimes stay up, and instead of saying, why did it have to be this way, despondently, you could sit there and think, I can't believe it was this way, on the other hand. So a lot of the time, these days, I don't necessarily recommend this, but understanding the unpredictability of life, I oftentimes just take things day by day, and I take it as it comes. At the same time, granted, I've always been directionless in life. I've never been the type where I wish I was. I really do. I wish I was one of those people that I knew what I wanted to do with my life from day one. Whatever it is. I'll see people who, even as a little kid, they want to be this, they want to be that. They want this profession or that. They want to be a doctor. They want to be a police officer. They want to, maybe they enjoy white-collar work, whatever. And they're locked in on it. And they just go right into it. It's like they have these goals set, and they work on them through school, get into college, get a major for it. They're locked in, and they get the degree, internships, training, you name it, get a job in that field, excel in it, and it's like they always knew what they wanted to do with their lives, and I've never been that way. I wish I was, but never have been. So, as a result, I've never really been the type to have that sort of planning or anything, but for many types that are, of course, I always recommend having those goals set, have them in steps, and set out to achieve them in both a balanced but still determined manner, and don't forget the small things either. This listener has an interesting question. A lot of times my mind will wander imagining what the future will be like, specifically the future of online entertainment. I foresee YouTube and independently produced online videos slowly being phased out as the decades pass, and being replaced as it becomes less and less profitable and more passé with future generations. What do you think will be the next step in online entertainment? Will live streams completely eclipse videos? Will an entirely new medium pop up as technology progresses? Just some food for thought. Love to hear your input. Keep up the good work, and thank you for the years of entertainment. So thank you for your question. It's hard to tell. There are some instances, at least in the recent past, that have pleasantly failed to take hold, even when many predicted them. For instance, back in 2020, I remember taking a look about this, because mind you, this might not be the best question for me, even though I create content, obviously. I'm practically an anachronism of sorts. I do things the way that I do them. I haven't really changed the way that I do them much. I still broadcast extensively on Shortwave in 2026, for goodness sake. So granted, I could only impart a few thoughts here and there. This is not cutting-edge stuff, but nevertheless, I have thoughts on it. Giving an example, though, of how this can vary, I do remember, in 2020, I think it was either 2020 or 2019, one of those years, I first heard of the social media platform TikTok. And I remember the platform was really taking off. I checked it out. I had no interest in it whatsoever. But there was, of course, the thought, should I establish a presence with my channel on TikTok, for instance, because it seemed like the site was expanding without any sort of end in sight. And there was a lot of talk back then that short-form content was going to be the future, and that TikTok was going to very quickly eclipse YouTube and then drive YouTube into irrelevancy. I made the decision that I'm not doing TikTok. I thought to myself, what would I even do there, exactly? What would I even do? How would I... What on earth would I even do there to make that even work? I have no idea. So I decided I'm not going to go for it. Instead, I'm just going to stick with my roots, stick with YouTube, and we're going to see what happens. I was sort of hedging my bet, metaphorically, on the fact that while some people were very, very bullishly predicting that TikTok was going to eclipse everything, I, on the other hand, thought there's still going to be people out there that prefer long-form content and still the familiarity that's since been ingrained with YouTube as a platform. And YouTube is so ubiquitous and so heavily utilized that it's one of the few websites that is more or less a broadcast medium in this day and age than it is just a website. So I thought I'm just going to stick to what I do and stick with YouTube, and we'll see what happens. And 6 years later, while TikTok is undeniably a massive, massive social media platform, it has its user base, but it hasn't killed YouTube. It hasn't even eclipsed YouTube. And as I had a hunch, the two platforms coexist. So some things end up holding on more resiliently than many predict in the moment. There was a time back in 2016, I think, when 3D video or whatever, that was all the rage, and that was just a trend. Or there was a time when, in 2014 or so, Google Glass, that sort of POV footage, that's going to be the future of online content, and that died out real fast. But there are other things that most certainly have risen. Particularly AI content. It's a regrettable thing. I think that you're only going to see more and more AI content in the future, especially as it improves to an extent. I think, again, I'm not so optimistic with AI at this point that it's necessarily going to begin, that it's necessarily going to keep expanding and getting better and better and better. I already think it's starting to sort of hit a hard limit of sorts. Things still get refined a bit, but you're just not seeing revolutionary, groundbreaking developments left and right. Like, you had some proponents, you would think, you literally had people years ago saying AI would have the cure for cancer by now in 2026. And that, AI will have taken over the world by now. It's like, it's just not there. It's just not there. But it is going to continue to advance in some ways that are just going to make things a bit more difficult for traditional content creators. As you're already seeing right now, but it's just going to get a bit tougher. I mean, giving an example, I was checking this out the other day, that I was, for a video I did on the main channel, Report of the Week, I was trying to find a good thumbnail for the video, and I noticed this button came up. It's on YouTube, and it said, help find the right thumbnail. Thought, I haven't seen this. I guess this is a new feature, so I clicked on it, and YouTube automatically generated an AI thumbnail for the video. Now, I didn't use that option, but the craziest part about it, and usually I have a good eye at sort of detecting and sniffing out AI, because, granted, a lot of the AI thumbnails that you see on YouTube these days, you could tell it's AI. But I kid you not, this did not look like it was made by AI. It looks like a genuine screenshot from the video. Like, it got everything right. There's almost no indication whatsoever that this was even an AI-generated thumbnail that YouTube created. The only giveaway, I had to actually re-watch the video, because at first I thought, where did I do this? Because like something, with like this pizza box. And I thought, did I actually have it? Did I hold it this way during the video? And I went back and looked, and I never did. And that's how I realized it was AI, but I mean, it was that good. I mean, I have to give YouTube credit. At least what I saw there, as far as AI is concerned, I gotta give them props. That was damn good. Because you could look at it, and I guarantee, if, supposing, I used that as the video thumbnail, I would be inclined to believe that probably not a single person, even if 200,000 people saw the review, not a single person would be able to tell that would be an AI thumbnail. Because the realism, it doesn't look cartoonish, it doesn't look it looks like a still from the video. Same quality, same everything. I'm looking at it right now. To me, when I see that, as far as AI goes, that I consider to be, as far as quality goes, you've got impressive quality, and then it borders, it's like, this is scary good, And I think in the future, you're going to see more of that. Of course, you're still going to see more, as a lot of big television networks continue to kind of die off a bit. They're going to continue expanding online, and they're going to make things harder for independent content creators. It's still going to be a bit more fragmented, but I think that YouTube is going to be around for a while longer. I think many creators will come and go, but I think YouTube, it's just one of those websites that has transcended from simply being a website to being a broadcast medium. And there's very few that I would ever say this, that they're almost using these cursed words, too big to fail. But if there's ever a site that I would say that about, it would be YouTube. Now, granted, is there a part of me that's biased because I want it to be that way, because that's what this is the platform I use to do what I do? Of course. Of course there is. But at the same time, looking impartially, the site, no matter what, has held its own, regardless of what grievances some may have. But there's always going to be unexpected things that happen, and there will be surprises going forward. Mark my words. Some kind words from Anthony in Sarasota, Florida. Just a few words of support. Been a listener and a fan for many years, and you've assisted me in many ways over those years. Be it a healthy laugh or a pleasant and friendly voice to help me sleep. You consistently deliver, which is a rare quality. Glad you still enjoy what you do, as you do it so very well. Thank you for continuing to contribute to the well-being of mostly complete strangers. You've always seemed to naturally produce some of the most authentic, interesting, and calming entertainment I've ever come across. I, along with many others, are perpetually grateful for your time and efforts. Take care. From Anthony, again in Sarasota, Florida. Anthony, your words mean the world to me. I really thank you for saying that. It means a lot. Anthony, you're the best, and I really do appreciate it. This is titled, A Long Overdue Check-In. Howdy, John. I haven't been keeping up with the podcast or radio shows for a while now, only listening a bit every year for the past 3 to 4 years, but still watching almost every video on the main channel. Been a fan of all that you do since 2015, and I've been listening to your more recent podcasts and just wanted to say thank you so much for continuing to do what you do. It's been so nice to hear you chat about random topics, and I find it very comforting and nostalgic to listen to you again. I used to be a line cook at Olive Garden and would listen to your podcast while working, so it reminds me of a simpler time in life. My favorites being, of course, the cryptid or horror-based ones, but of course I enjoy all of them. If I may pose a question to you, and please do take the time you need to find an answer, how does it feel to be nostalgic to some of your viewers and or listeners? I recall you mentioned the East Asia broadcast having some of the same correspondence and people saying welcome back, and I couldn't help but feel the same way, even though it was purely due to my own lack of time involving keeping up with your ongoing shows. Thank you so much for your time, and apologies for the long-winded nature of this email, but I had to fit in a few years of thoughts into this. Wishing you the absolute best from Zachary. Zachary, thank you for checking in. So to your question that you asked, it's an interesting one, and one granted that I don't think my thoughts on it are necessarily extensive. I understand the feeling, though, because I myself am quite nostalgic, to begin with. So for me, I look back even to some, to 10 years ago, etc., and I get nostalgic for some of those times as well. Although, nevertheless, it is a strange feeling to be the focus of nostalgia, for some, considering the length of time it has been that I have been doing my work. And I don't think that feeling will ever not be strange. It doesn't weird me out or anything, but it is odd to think of, but I understand it at the same time. Great to have you back, though, Zachary. This listener writes, Thank you, Review Bra. You put me onto that Starbucks water, and yes, you could definitely taste the difference. The triple filter and frigid ice cubes paired with the Trenta cup is a good combination to deliver frozen hydration goodness. Hope all is well, and as stated before, I'm listening to all your VORWs, and I'm currently in the year 2021. Hope 2026 is going extremely well for you. Thank you for writing in, and I appreciate the picture you included of the Trenta cup, by the way. I actually have a Starbucks water right here, which I will take a sip of. We hear from Connor in Huntington Beach, who says, It's been a number of years since I last wrote in, and I have 2 questions. My first question, I know for me it's quite interesting to see you progress from a teenager to a man. Your channel is a bit of a time capsule in a way. How do you feel about having that transition documented? Do you ever go back to your old videos and reflect on where you've come from? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So, I don't like looking at my old content, or new content for that matter, but of course, just like I was mentioning, I do get, of course, nostalgic and have nostalgia, and I often reflect on my life and how things were years ago, and how things have progressed in a sense. But it's not necessarily through looking at the content itself, it's more or less just contemplation, in a sense, and it has nothing really to do with the videos. But obviously the whole process, I'm comfortable enough with it to have all of that there on YouTube. Like sometimes I'll see people comment on the old videos from 2011 and they'll say, oh, please never take this down. And I think to myself, well, why would I take it down? All of those videos have been there for getting on 16 years now for a reason. If I had such a problem with them, they would have been taken down long, long ago. So, the old content and all of that, it's there to stay, it's not going anywhere. But at the same time, for the documentation itself on YouTube, I don't really think much of it. I just sort of think, alright, it's interesting. And then that's about it. I just don't really think terribly much about that sort of thing. Like I said, though I do think often about the past, it's not through looking at old videos of mine, but again, it's just personal contemplation. Now, your second question, you say, have you ever heard or seen of Ask Oki's videos on YouTube? He's a maker of bespoke suits and has quite a few videos on classic tailoring principles, fashion etiquette, etc. So getting to your second question, I've heard of the channel, but I must admit I don't watch any menswear channels on YouTube at this point. I'm familiar with him. I've seen recommendations. I've gotten recommendations for it, but I don't watch any of his content, nor do I watch any other menswear or suit-related content or any of that. You know, to me it's just clothing that I like and wear and put very little thought into otherwise. And concluding, you say, do you have any plans to make non-review content? Perhaps at some point. Ideally, it's just trying to thread the needle in order to regrettably appease the algorithm and, answering bluntly, being able to make money off of this channel. If no one watches it, then that's not a possibility. And just a few bad performing videos can seriously hurt the channel in the algorithm, and the very regrettable truth from what I've seen analytically, I know people will say that there would be enough people out there that would be willing to watch that sort of content, but I just don't believe that. I wish that were true, but the analytics always tell me otherwise when I try to. But I will never say never, and I might, if I feel bold or adventurous, I might take a leap here and there and make some random sorts of videos and hope that they float maybe at least enough. Just as a lot of people, when I turn on the camera, and I think all of you listening, you understand and you get this, when I turn the camera on and do the reviews, I always play up certain aspects, right? I kind of become review bra, where I'm much more, I don't know if I would go as far as to say bombastic, but I try to be at least animated, and, there's a certain pace and cadence I maintain when doing the reviews. I can be a little snarky, lots of dry humor and all of that, and I just play that sort of stuff up for the reviews, but a lot of people just want to see that. They want to see Review Bra and the fast food, and they don't necessarily want to see me sit here in a much more reserved manner delivering a lecture about, international broadcasting. I guarantee if I did that, the video would be such a massive, miserable failure. Even though I would love to do it and I would love talking about it, people would not have the same enthusiasm watching it as I would have making it. So, in the meantime, especially when this is something that I still have to depend on, I'd prefer to take the safe route, you understand, and do the reviews because I still know that that's a trusted format that I'm well experienced with at this point and can count on at least keeping everything afloat, which is my goal at present. But, like I said, I might feel a little adventurous at times, and, hey, maybe I'll branch out. We'll see what happens, right? That's a door I definitely want to leave open no matter what, so. Thank you for, resending it, and it's been a while, but see, this is living proof to anyone out there that if I miss an email, just keep resending it, and I'll get to it in time. If you resend it enough, I will see it. My eyes will. Let's get to two more. This listener says, I was just watching some of your videos while eating Domino's Chicken Alfredo, and it would be cool if you review it. So thank you for the suggestion. I didn't even know they had that. Domino's Chicken Alfredo. It's one of those pasta... Okay. Pasta bowls. Okay. Thank you for the suggestion. And last but not least, we hear from Megan in Indiana, who says, I hope this finds you well. I've recently found your channel again after listening to a few others speak out about the rising prices of fast food yet poor quality. I used to watch your reviews about 10 years ago, and I'm glad to be back, and I'm excited to listen to your broadcast. Anyway, I'm curious to know if you have any Culver's, Dairy Queens, or other equivalent fast food restaurants in your area. I live in the Midwest, and they're basically everywhere. I personally am not impressed by their food, although I am a fan of their ice cream, but I'm curious about your thoughts, that is, if they're available. So thank you, Megan, from Indiana, checking in. I do have both, Culver's especially, and I enjoy Culver's, though I have noticed that the quality of their food has fluctuated. Now, this might just be a local issue, but I remember there was a time, maybe in 2017 or so, I would actually, if I had the energy and the motivation, that is, Culver's was so good back then. The nearest one to me was a 50-mile drive in either direction, but it was a pretty straight shot. You just get on Interstate 95. I would shoot up north. It was near Daytona Beach, Florida, and go up there, and I would literally just do it for Culver's. Plus, it was a pleasant drive, and then have the meal and then head back. And it was that good to me that it was actually worth it. Now, years later, I'm much closer to a Culver's. I could just get it delivered now. I don't have to go all the way, and drive 50 miles for it anymore. But I've just noticed the quality of it has gotten a lot less consistent. It used to be consistently good, like really, really good, all the time. You were guaranteed good. But there have been times now where I'll go there and it's just okay. It's just alright. And the ice cream is still good. The frozen custard it's what they do. I enjoy that. And they've still maintained the standards there, but some of their burgers aren't as consistently good as they used to be, regrettably. They're still, more often than not, they're there are more times where they're better than otherwise, but there have been instances I've gone there, and it's the quality has been disappointingly lacking. But that might just be a local issue. I hope it's not more widespread in the broad sense. I know people are they're fierce about their Culvers. It's a beloved chain, you know. I remember when I did a review of something from Culver's, and I had some grievances about the burger that I got. Oh my goodness, did that get mixed reactions? So people fiercely defend their Culvers, so I hope the issue is just local to me. Thank you for your question, and that concludes this podcast. Hope to have another one soon where I'll read more of your emails, respond to more of your letters, and pieces of feedback. It would be great to hear from you, VORWINFO@gmail.com. Until next time, take care all.